In the past 12 months, the Dead Sea, long branded the most lifeless water body on Earth, has erupted with signs of vitality no one predicted. On 14 November 2024, an interdisciplinary dive team from the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research surfaced with video of 7-meter-tall white smoker chimneys jetting milky plumes from the lake floor. Laboratory isotopic analysis traced those plumes back to freshwater aquifers, carrying not only dissolved halite but living microbes adapted to brackish conditions. Just days later, The Guardian confirmed the discovery, noting that each chimney sits directly beneath clusters of coastal sinkholes, some already colonized by algae mats and tiny crustaceans, providing geologists with a real-time hazard map and biologists with an unexpected nursery. These revelations crown a decade-long ecological surprise. In 2011, hikers near Ain Gedi photographed tilapia-like fish schooling inside a freshwater pit, only meters from hypersaline waves. By 2018, the Dead Sea Revival Project had documented multiple sinkholes carpeted with green filamentous algae and red-bellied tilapia, contradicting every high school textbook description of the Dead Sea as sterile. To appreciate how extraordinary this is, consider the chemistry. Dead Sea surface water averages 340 parts per thousand salinity, almost 10 times the ocean, yet the sinkholes measure below 10 parts per thousand, a threshold hospitable to freshwater species. Each new chimney or fissure effectively punches a straw from regional aquifers, straight through kilometers of salt, leaking living water into a realm once thought permanently cursed. Is the Dead Sea's unexpected revival mere geology, or the opening act of a vision penned by the prophet Ezekiel 26 centuries ago? The evidence begins at the bottom of the lake and ripples outward, to archaeology, geopolitics, and eschatology. Keep watching. Picture Ezekiel 47. The prophet, living in exile, gets a vision that starts inside a future temple. From under its front doorway, a tiny stream trickles east. Every 1,500 feet or so, the guide in the vision measures the water again. First it reaches Ezekiel's ankles, then his knees, then his waist, and finally it becomes a deep, rushing river no one can cross. The Hebrew phrase Ezekiel uses is Mayim Chayim, living water. That river heads straight for the Arabah, the desert valley that today holds the Dead Sea. Ezekiel even names two familiar oases, En-Gedi and En-Eglaim, both on the sea's western shore. By verse 8, the guide explains that this river will pour into the sea of stagnant waters and heal it so fish can live there again. The word for heal is Rapha, to mend what was broken. Ezekiel isn't the only prophet who talks about this. Zechariah 14:8 promises a future day when water will flow year-round, half toward the Mediterranean and half toward the Dead Sea. The Apostle John, writing Revelation 22:1-2, sees a crystal-clear river coming from God's throne, with trees on both sides whose leaves heal the nations. Three voices, Ezekiel, Zechariah, and John, paint the same picture. God sends life-giving water that reverses a curse. Bible teachers debate how literal this is. Is it an exact description of future geography, a picture of spiritual renewal, or both? Whatever your take, the core idea is plain. God plans to take the most lifeless place on earth and fill it with life. And right now, as scientists find fish and algae in Dead Sea sinkholes, Ezekiel's vision sounds a lot less like poetry and a lot more like a coming reality. Geologists call the Dead Sea a terminal lake, a place where water flows in but never out, leaving behind salt that builds year after year. Yet since the 1970s, the lake has been shrinking by roughly 3 feet a year, exposing broad mud flats laced with invisible pockets of air. When the roof over one of those pockets collapses, a sinkhole opens, and that's where the surprises begin. Drilling shows that many holes tap underground springs carrying almost fresh water. Sometimes only 1/30th as salty as the main lake. Ecologists sampling those pools in 2011 found tilapia, tiny crustaceans, and carpets of green algae, thriving where textbooks said life was impossible. The story deepened on November 14, 2024, when a German-Israeli dive team filmed towering white smokers on the lake floor. Salt chimneys up to 20 feet high that vent shimmering plumes of groundwater. Chemical tests trace the flow back to coastal aquifers, the very same aquifers feeding the sinkholes on shore. These vents work like natural straws, drawing comparatively fresh water through layers of rock and punching it straight into the dead center of the lake. Each plume dissolves salt, then recrystallizes it into chalk-white columns that look eerily like the pillars described by some Bible translations. Biologists measuring the water around the chimneys recorded salinity below 10 parts per thousand, close to ordinary brackish estuaries, and well within the comfort zone of freshwater fish. In other words, pockets of the Dead Sea are already meeting Ezekiel's minimum requirement. Water healed enough for fish of every kind to gather. Ezekiel 47:9-10. None of this proves the prophet's timeline, but it leaves us with a striking image. Modern instruments are documenting the early stages of a process Ezekiel sketched 2,600 years ago. Science, it seems, is finding data points on a map the Bible drew first. When Ezekiel pictured a healed Dead Sea, he placed it inside a bigger schedule, one that other prophets helped fill in. Daniel 9:24-27 outlines a clock of 70 weeks of years, the last week being a final 7-year stretch that many scholars call the tribulation. Jesus echoes that framework in Matthew 24, warning that unprecedented turmoil will climax just before his return. Isaiah 35 adds color. Deserts burst with flowers and streams break forth in the Arabah, the same rift where the Dead Sea sits. Paul widens the lens in Romans 8:19-22. Creation itself, he says, is groaning, waiting to be liberated from its bondage to decay. Environmental wounds, therefore, aren't just random. They are symptoms of a cosmic countdown that ends in renewal. Ezekiel's flowing river looks like the moment that groaning stops. But when does that moment land on the calendar? Two main schools square off. Some say the Dead Sea comes alive after the 7 years, when Christ reigns from Jerusalem. That matches Ezekiel's temple setting. Worship restored, river unleashed. But we say we're already seeing a preview. Just as the budding of the fig tree signals summer, Matthew 24:32-33, today's sinkholes and freshwater vents may be in early bloom, hinting that the full harvest is close. The debate connects to Ezekiel 38-39, the Gog-Magog invasion, which sits chronologically near the Dead Sea miracle. Analysts note that today's Russia-Iran alliance, Turkish troop movements, and drone corridors over Syria sketch the very coalition Ezekiel listed by name. Whether that war happens before or during the tribulation affects where we place the river event. Either way, every prophetic strand points the same direction. The clock is ticking from desolation toward a messianic restoration where even the saltiest sea can't stay dead. The Dead Sea's revival isn't happening in a vacuum. It's unfolding in the world's driest, most politically charged river basin. In November 2022 and again in late 2023, Israel, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates renewed Project Prosperity, a solar for desalinated water swap. Jordan will host a 600-megawatt UAE-funded solar farm, Project Green, and in return receive up to 200 million cubic meters of drinking water a year pumped north from new Israeli desalination plants on the Red Sea coast, Project Blue. The deal's back-channel purpose is clear. Buy time before the Dead Sea's rapid drop sparks an ecological and strategic crisis. Yet the region's broader water ledger is flashing red. Turkey's giant GAP dam network already cuts Euphrates flow to Syria by roughly 40%, shrinking reservoirs and triggering rolling blackouts downstream. Jordan, meanwhile, reports per capita water availability below 61 cubic meters a year, 1/8 of the UN's absolute scarcity line. As rivers dry, Psalm 83's ancient lineup of border adversaries suddenly looks less theoretical. Scarcity fuels the very alliances of necessity and aggression the psalmist foresaw. Israel's planners aren't waiting. The Temple Institute has already fabricated priestly garments, recreated sacred vessels, and imported 5 red heifer candidates from Texas. Ritual prerequisites for a third temple era that Ezekiel links to the Dead Sea's healing. Critics dismiss the preparations as fringe, yet each new altar stone and heifer quarantine inches prophecy from page to pavement. Could megaprojects like Project Prosperity short-circuit the need for Ezekiel's river, or will they simply tee up the moment when human fixes fail and divine intervention takes center stage? Intelligence analysts track pipeline routes and desal plant tenders. Watchful believers track chapter and verse. Either way, water, once an overlooked backdrop, has become the main stage where geology, diplomacy, and destiny converge. Tomorrow's headlines may read like today's pact, but Ezekiel's script says the real solution still flows from a throne, not a treaty. News of fish in the Dead Sea does more than rewrite a science paper. It forces a heart check. When Jesus pointed to the budding fig tree in Matthew 24:32-33, he was telling his disciples to read the times the way sailors read the sky. The regreening of the saltiest spot on earth feels like just such a bud. But before we run to headlines, Scripture hands us two guardrails. First, watchfulness. Paul urges believers to stay awake, for you are all children of light. 1 Thessalonians 5:4-6. Signs are meant to stir alertness, not anxiety. Second, discernment. Acts 17:11 praises the Bereans for testing claims against the word. Sensational posts are cheap. Careful study is costly but essential. What then should an awakened, discerning church do? 1. Share the hope. If God can breathe life into water 34% salt, he can resurrect human lives eaten away by sin. Ezekiel's river flows ultimately from Christ, the fountain of living waters. John 7:37-38. Second, steward creation. The coming renewal does not license neglect. Romans 8 says creation groans. Believers answer that groan with responsible care, signaling the kingdom's values ahead of schedule. 3. Pursue holiness. Peter ties end times expectation to personal purity. What kind of people ought you to be? Live holy and godly lives. 2 Peter 3:11. Rapture Revealed will keep tracking every core sample, sinkhole survey, and Temple Mount development. Each data point is an invitation to deeper vigilance. Eyes on the news, knees on the floor. Bible open. As the Dead Sea inches from desolation toward destiny, we'll be here with continuing coverage connecting the latest facts to the oldest prophecy until the river flows in full and the headlines give way to his appearing.